The flames licked at the night sky like hungry demons, and Delilah Kensington could see them coming from half a mile away, 5 torches blazing through the darkness toward her small farm on the outskirts of Oklahoma City. She gripped the old shotgun her father had left her, her knuckles white against the weathered wood, and positioned herself between the approaching riders and the chicken coop where her precious flock clucked nervously, somehow sensing the danger that rode toward them on horseback. It was August of 1883, and the heat of the Oklahoma summer had baked the earth hard as iron, making everything tinder dry and perfect for burning, which was exactly what the Dalton gang had been doing to every farm that refused to pay their protection money. Delilah was 23 years old and had been running this farm alone since her father died of fever 2 winters past, and she would be damned if she let a pack of cowards burn down everything she had worked so hard to keep alive. The chickens were not just livestock to her, they were her livelihood, her income, the thing that kept her fed and kept the bank from taking her land. Every egg they produced was precious. Every hen was worth more than gold to her survival out here on the frontier, where a woman alone had to fight twice as hard for half as much respect. "Come out, Miss Kensington," a rough voice called through the darkness. "We gave you fair warning. Pay up or burn up. Those were the terms." She recognized the voice as belonging to Jack Pritchard, a weasel-faced man who rode with the Dalton gang and took particular pleasure in terrorizing people weaker than himself. The gang had been extorting farmers and ranchers throughout the Oklahoma Territory for months now, and the law seemed either unable or unwilling to stop them. Delilah had told them 3 weeks ago that she would not pay a single cent, that she would rather die than give in to their threats, and now they had come to make good on their promise to burn her out. "You get off my land," Delilah shouted back, raising the shotgun to her shoulder. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice did not shake. "I have nothing for you, and I will shoot the first man who touches my property." Laughter erupted from the riders. 5 of them spread out in a line, their torches casting dancing shadows across their faces. They thought she was bluffing, thought a woman alone would not have the courage to pull the trigger. They were wrong about the courage part, but they were right that she was outgunned and outmatched. Even if she got one of them, the others would rush her, and then it would all be over. "Last chance, sweetheart," Pritchard called. "Throw down that gun and maybe we will just take what you owe us in chickens. Keep pointing it at us and we burn everything." Delilah's finger tightened on the trigger, her mind racing through impossible options. She could fire and maybe hit one of them, but then what? She could run for the house, but they would burn the coop before she made it halfway there. She could surrender, but they would take everything anyway and probably burn her out just for the fun of it. There was no good choice, only different kinds of losing, and she felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes, even as she kept her face hard and defiant. That was when she heard the thunder of hooves coming fast from the east, a single rider moving at a gallop through the darkness. The Dalton gang heard it too, and they turned their horses, torches raised high to see who was approaching. Delilah kept her shotgun trained on them, not daring to hope that whoever was coming might be help rather than another threat. The rider burst into the circle of torchlight, and Delilah saw a tall man on a bay horse, wearing a dusty black hat and a long coat that flared behind him as he reined his mount to a sliding stop between her and the gang. He sat easy in the saddle despite the hard ride, and even in the flickering light she could see the pair of revolvers holstered at his hips and the rifle in the scabbard by his knee. "Evening, gentlemen," the stranger said, his voice calm and level, despite the tension crackling through the air like lightning before a storm. "Seems like 5 armed men against 1 woman is about 4 too many for a fair fight. Why do you not pick on someone your own size?" "This is none of your concern, Drifter," Pritchard snarled. "Ride on before you get hurt." "See, I would love to do that," the stranger replied, and Delilah could hear the hint of danger beneath his pleasant tone. "But my mama raised me to never stand by when a lady needs help, so here is what's going to happen. You boys are going to turn those horses around and ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of, and the lady's going to keep her farm and her chickens. Everybody lives to see another day. Sound fair?" "There are 5 of us and 1 of you," another gang member growled. "You cannot stop all of us." The stranger's hand moved so fast Delilah almost missed it, and suddenly his revolver was drawn and aimed at Pritchard's chest. "Want to bet?" "I will start with your boss here, then work my way down the line. I guarantee I can get 3 of you before any of you can get me, and then it is just 2 of you against me and the lady with the shotgun. I like those odds just fine." The gang members shifted nervously in their saddles, exchanging glances. They were bullies and cowards, used to terrorizing people who could not fight back, and confronted with someone willing to match their violence, they suddenly lost their appetite for burning. Pritchard's face twisted with rage and humiliation, but Delilah could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that this stranger was not bluffing. "The Dalton gang will hear about this," Pritchard spat. "You just made an enemy, Cowboy." "I have made enemies before," the stranger said. "I am still here. They are not. Now ride." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Pritchard jerked his horse's head around and jabbed his spurs into its flanks, sending the animal leaping forward into a gallop. The other 4 followed, their torches streaming behind them like comet tails as they disappeared into the darkness. Delilah watched them go, hardly daring to believe they had actually left, that her farm was still standing, that her chickens were still safe in their coop. The stranger holstered his revolver and turned his horse to face her. In the moonlight, Delilah could see him more clearly now. He was young, probably around 25 or 26, with strong features and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat brim. His eyes were gray as storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "You can lower the shotgun now, madam," he said gently. "They are gone." Delilah realized she was still aiming the weapon, her arms trembling with the strain of holding it ready for so long. She lowered it slowly, suddenly feeling the full weight of what had almost happened. Her legs went weak, and she stumbled backward, catching herself against the fence post. "Easy there," the stranger said, swinging down from his saddle with practiced grace. He approached her slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. "Just breathe. You're safe." "They were going to burn everything," Delilah heard herself saying, her voice sounding distant and strange. "All of it. The chickens, the house, everything." "But they did not," the cowboy said firmly. He was close enough now that she could see the dust on his clothes, smell the leather and horse and sweat that clung to him. "Your farm is safe. Your chickens are safe. You are safe." "The chickens." Delilah laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that bubbled up from her chest. "You risked your life for chickens. You do not even know me, and you rode in here ready to die for my chickens." The corner of his mouth quirked up in something that was not quite a smile. "I rode in ready to help someone who needed it. The chickens were just a bonus." He extended his hand. "Name is Ryder Yancey. I am new to these parts, just rode into Oklahoma City this afternoon looking for work." Delilah stared at his hand for a moment before shifting the shotgun to her left arm and accepting his handshake. His grip was firm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. "Delilah Kensington. This is my farm, what there is of it. Pleased to meet you, Miss Kensington, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "Delilah is fine," she said, releasing his hand with some reluctance. The warmth of human contact, the simple reassurance of another person's presence after months of solitude, was almost overwhelming. "And I cannot thank you enough for what you just did. If you had not come along when you did—" "But I did," Ryder interrupted. "No point in dwelling on what might have happened. Question is, what are you going to do now? Those boys might come back, especially if they work up their courage or get some reinforcements." The reality of her situation crashed down on Delilah like a bucket of cold water. He was right. The Dalton gang would not forget this humiliation, and they would be back, probably with more men and more anger. She could not fight them off alone, and Ryder Yancey, whoever he was, would not be around forever to protect her. "I do not know," she admitted. "I cannot leave. This farm is all I have, but I cannot fight them all by myself either." Ryder was quiet for a moment, looking around at the modest farm, the small house with its sagging porch, the chicken coop, the barn that needed new boards, the fields that showed signs of one person working too hard to keep everything going. When he looked back at her, there was something thoughtful in his expression. "You said I was looking for work," he said slowly. "What if I worked here? You need help running this place, and I need a job and a place to stay. I can handle myself in a fight, as you just saw, and I know my way around a farm. We could help each other out." Delilah's first instinct was to refuse. She had been alone for so long, had worked so hard to prove she could make it on her own, that accepting help felt like admitting defeat. But pride was a luxury she could not afford, not with the Dalton gang threatening to burn her out, not with winter coming and so much work still to be done. And there was something about Ryder Yancey, something in the calm competence he radiated and the way he had risked himself for a stranger that made her want to trust him. "I cannot pay much," she said carefully. "Just room and board and a small wage. This farm does not bring in a lot of money." "Room and board sounds fine to me," Ryder replied, "and we can work out the rest as we go. Right now, what you need most is someone who can help keep you safe and keep this place running." "I can do both." Delilah looked into his gray eyes and made a decision that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "All right. You have got yourself a job, Ryder Yancey. The barn has a small room in the loft that is clean and dry. You can stay there." Ryder touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both courtly and casual. "Much obliged, Delilah. I will get my gear settled and then check the perimeter, make sure those boys did not circle back." He led his horse toward the barn, and Delilah watched him go, her mind whirling with questions and possibilities. Who was this man who had appeared out of nowhere like an answer to a prayer she had not even known how to say? Why had he been so willing to risk himself for her? And why did the sight of his broad shoulders and easy stride make her heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with fear? She shook her head, trying to clear away the foolish thoughts. She had no time for romantic notions. She had a farm to run and enemies to worry about. Whatever else Ryder Yancey might be, he was hired help, nothing more. She could not afford to think of him any other way. But as she walked back to the house, checking over her shoulder to make sure the chickens were truly safe, she found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. The next morning dawned hot and bright, the sun climbing into a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Delilah was up before dawn, as always, tending to the chickens and gathering eggs. She had 42 hens and 2 roosters, and they were her pride and joy, each one with its own personality and quirks. She knew them all by sight, could tell when one was feeling poorly or when the pecking order had shifted. They clucked and fussed around her feet as she scattered feed, and she found comfort in their simple presence, their uncomplicated needs. She was just finishing up when she heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Ryder approaching from the barn. He had cleaned up somehow, his face freshly shaved and his hair still damp. In the morning light, she could see him even more clearly, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he looked at the chickens. "Morning," he said. "Thought I would see what needs doing around here." "Morning?" Delilah replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious about her old work dress and the fact that she had not bothered with anything more than pulling her long, dark hair into a simple braid. "There's always plenty that needs doing. The north fence has some posts that need replacing, the barn roof leaks in the back corner, and the vegetable garden is being overrun by weeds. Take your pick." Ryder surveyed the farm with the practiced eye of someone who knew hard work. "How about I start with the fence? If the Dalton gang or anyone else comes looking for trouble, I would rather have good boundaries. Then I can work on the barn roof before the next rain." "That sounds good," Delilah said, impressed by his practical thinking. "There are tools in the barn and spare posts stacked behind it. I will bring you some water and food in a bit." "No need to fuss on my account," Ryder said. "Just point me toward the well and I can take care of myself." "It is no fuss," Delilah replied, more sharply than she intended. "I take care of the people who work for me." Something flickered in Ryder's expression, but he just nodded and headed toward the barn to collect the tools. Delilah watched him go, then gathered her basket of eggs and headed for the house. She needed to prepare breakfast anyway, and it was no extra trouble to make enough for 2. That was what she told herself, at least, ignoring the small flutter of anticipation that made her take a bit more care than usual with the biscuits and bacon. By mid-morning, when she carried a tray out to where Ryder was working on the fence, she found him stripped down to just his pants and undershirt, his coat and outer shirt hung on a nearby post. The August heat was already fierce, and sweat gleamed on his arms as he worked the post digger, his muscles moving beneath his skin with easy strength. Delilah felt heat rise to her face that had nothing to do with the sun, and she looked away quickly, annoyed at herself. "Brought you some food," she called out, keeping her voice brisk and businesslike. Ryder straightened, wiping his brow with his forearm, and broke into a genuine smile that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Delilah's breath catch. "That smells amazing. I've been living on trail rations for weeks." They sat in the shade of an old cottonwood tree, and Ryder ate with the focused intensity of a man who was genuinely hungry. Delilah picked at her own food, stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Why did you really help me last night? Most people would have ridden on, not wanted to get involved." Ryder was quiet for a moment, his expression growing serious. "I have seen what happens when good people stand by and let bad things happen. Lost my own family's ranch to men like the Dalton gang, back in Texas. I was just a kid, could not do anything to stop it. I swore when I grew up that I would never be that helpless again, and I would never let someone else suffer if I could prevent it." "I am sorry," Delilah said softly, "about your family." "It was a long time ago," Ryder replied, but she could hear the old pain beneath his words. "My parents are gone now. Fever took them a few years back. It was just as well they did not have to see the ranch lost. They had put everything into that land." "I know something about that," Delilah said. "This farm was my father's dream. He saved for 20 years to buy this land, to have something that was his. When he died, I promised myself I would keep it going no matter what. I owe him that much." They looked at each other, and Delilah felt a connection forming, an understanding between two people who had both lost much and were both fighting to hold on to what little they had left. It was not attraction, she told herself, just recognition of a kindred spirit. But the way her heart was beating suggested her heart did not entirely agree with her head. "We will keep it going," Ryder said firmly. "Together. Those boys will not burn you out while I am here. I promise you that." "Do not make promises you might not be able to keep," Delilah said, but there was no heat in her words. "The Dalton gang is dangerous. There are a lot of them, and they have powerful friends. The sheriff does not seem interested in stopping them." "Then we will stop them ourselves," Ryder said, "or at least make it too costly for them to bother with you. Sometimes that is all you can do." They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Ryder went back to work on the fence, while Delilah returned to her endless list of chores. But throughout the day, she found herself aware of his presence in a way that was both comforting and unsettling. When she was working in the garden, she could hear the ring of his hammer driving fence posts. When she was in the chicken coop, she could see him moving around the barn. It had been so long since she had another person on the farm, someone to share the burden of the work, and she had not realized how lonely she had been until the loneliness started to ease. 3 days passed in a pattern of hard work and careful routine. Ryder proved to be exactly what he had promised, a skilled worker who knew his way around a farm and was not afraid of long hours in the brutal Oklahoma heat. He fixed the fence, patched the barn roof, and started working his way through the dozens of other repairs and improvements that Delilah had been putting off for lack of time and help. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch after dinner, too tired to do much more than watch the sunset and listen to the crickets sing. Delilah found herself looking forward to those quiet hours, to the sound of Ryder's voice as he told stories about his travels or asked her about her chickens. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh, something she had not done nearly enough of in the past 2 years. And when he looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, she felt seen in a way she had not experienced since her father died, like she mattered to someone beyond just being another face in town. On the 4th day, Delilah drove the wagon into Oklahoma City to sell her eggs at the general store, as she did twice a week. The town was growing rapidly, transforming from a rough frontier settlement into something more substantial. The railroad had come through 2 years earlier, bringing commerce and people, and now there were actual buildings lining the main street instead of just tents and rough shacks. The general store was run by a kind older man named Mr. Patterson, who always gave her a fair price for her eggs and never made her feel lesser for being a woman alone. She was just loading her empty baskets back into the wagon when she heard a familiar voice that made her stomach clench with dread. "Well, if it is not Miss Kensington," Jack Pritchard said, stepping out from the alley beside the store. He was alone, but his hand rested on the gun at his hip in a way that was clearly meant as a threat. "Seems like you made some new friends. That's real touching." "Leave me alone, Pritchard," Delilah said, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was pounding. I have no quarrel with you if you leave me and my farm in peace." "See, that is the problem," Pritchard said, moving closer. "You and your friend made fools of us. The Dalton gang does not forget things like that. We have a reputation to maintain." "Then maybe you should maintain it by going after people who actually deserve it," Delilah shot back, anger overcoming fear. "Leave honest farmers alone and go rob a bank or something." Pritchard's face darkened with rage, and for a moment Delilah thought he was going to hit her. But then he seemed to get control of himself, and a nasty smile spread across his face instead. "You tell that cowboy of yours that he should watch his back, and you should watch yours too. Accidents happen out on lonely farms. Be a shame if something happened to those precious chickens of yours." He walked away before Delilah could respond, disappearing into the crowd on the main street. She stood by the wagon, shaking with a mixture of fear and fury, until Mr. Patterson emerged from the store with a concerned expression. "Are you all right, Miss Kensington? I saw Pritchard talking to you." "I am fine," Delilah lied. "Just the usual threats." "You should talk to the sheriff," Mr. Patterson said, but they both knew it was useless. The sheriff was either paid off or intimidated, and he had made it clear he was not interested in taking on the Dalton gang. Delilah drove home faster than usual, the horse sensing her agitation and responding with anxious speed. When she pulled into the farmyard, she was relieved to see everything intact, Ryder working on repairing the chicken coop's wire fence. He looked up at her approach, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. "What happened?" Delilah climbed down from the wagon and told him about her encounter with Pritchard. As she spoke, she watched Ryder's face grow hard and dangerous, saw the flash of anger in his eyes. "He threatened you in broad daylight in the middle of town," Ryder said, his voice tight. "They are getting bolder." "I know," Delilah said. "I'm sorry I brought this trouble down on you. You should leave before it gets worse. I have no right to ask you to stay and fight my battles." "Stop that," Ryder said sharply, and Delilah blinked in surprise at his tone. He took a breath, visibly calming himself. "Sorry. I just mean, I'm not leaving. I told you I would help you keep this farm safe, and I meant it. The Dalton gang does not scare me off." "But why?" Delilah demanded, all her confusion and fear spilling out in the question. "Why do you care so much? This is not your farm, not your fight. You do not owe me anything." Ryder looked at her for a long moment, and Delilah saw something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. "Maybe I've got my own reasons for wanting to stay," he said quietly. "Reasons that have nothing to do with the Dalton gang or the farm." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Delilah wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to close the distance between them and find out if the warmth in his eyes meant what she thought it did. But fear held her back, fear of being wrong, fear of being hurt, fear of wanting something she had no right to want. "I should get these eggs stored," she said, breaking the moment, "and start on dinner." She fled to the house before Ryder could respond, her heart hammering and her thoughts in chaos. What was happening to her? She had known this man for less than a week, and yet every time he looked at her, every time he spoke in that low, steady voice, she felt something awakening inside her that she had thought long dead. It was foolish and dangerous and completely impractical, and she could not seem to stop it. That night, she lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the farm. She could hear the chickens settling in their coop, the creak of the barn in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote's lonely howl. And she thought about Ryder Yancey, about the way he had risked himself for her, the way he worked tirelessly to help her keep her father's dream alive, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and worth protecting. She thought about how long it had been since anyone had looked at her that way. The next week brought a false sense of peace. There were no more visits from the Dalton gang, no more threats. Delilah and Ryder fell into an easy rhythm of work and companionship, and she began to let herself hope that maybe Pritchard had just been trying to scare her, that maybe they would leave her alone after all. She should have known better. It was a Tuesday evening, the sun just beginning to set, when Delilah heard the chickens start to shriek in alarm. She dropped the plate she was washing and ran for the door, her stomach lurching with dread. Ryder was already moving, sprinting from the barn toward the chicken coop with his rifle in hand. 3 men were in the coop, grabbing chickens and snapping their necks with casual brutality. Delilah screamed in rage and horror, watching her precious birds being killed, and then Ryder was there, his rifle raised. "Step away from the chickens," he commanded, his voice like iron. The three men turned, and Delilah recognized them as gang members she had seen with Pritchard. They were all armed, but they had not expected Ryder to be so fast. For a moment, everyone froze. "Drop the chickens and get out," Ryder said. "Last warning." One of the men laughed and reached for his gun. Ryder's rifle cracked, and the man went down with a scream, clutching his leg. The other two dropped the dead chickens and raised their hands, eyes wide with shock. "Get your friend and go," Ryder said coldly, "and tell Pritchard that the next time he sends someone to hurt this farm, I will not aim for legs." The two uninjured men grabbed their wounded companion and dragged him away, stumbling in their haste to escape. Ryder kept his rifle trained on them until they were mounted and riding off, and then he lowered the weapon and turned to Delilah. She was standing in the middle of the coop, surrounded by feathers and blood and the bodies of 6 dead hens. Tears streamed down her face as she knelt and picked up one of the still warm bodies, cradling it against her chest. "They killed them," she whispered. "They just killed them for no reason." Ryder set his rifle aside and came to kneel beside her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Delilah. I should have been watching closer." "This is not your fault," Delilah choked out. "This is those monsters. They did this to hurt me, to show me they can reach me whenever they want." "Then we need to make sure they cannot," Ryder said firmly. He stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, let us get these girls buried properly, and then we need to make a plan. This has gone far enough." They buried the dead chickens as the sun set, and Delilah said a few words over the grave, feeling foolish and heartbroken all at once. They were just chickens, she knew that, but they had been hers, and they had been killed for no reason except cruelty. It made her sick and furious in equal measure. Back at the house, Ryder made coffee while Delilah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup for warmth despite the lingering heat of the day. She felt cold inside, shaken by the realization that the Dalton gang was not going to stop, that they would keep coming until they destroyed everything she had. "I need to go after them," Ryder said quietly. "Find their camp and make it clear that if they come after you again, there will be consequences." "No," Delilah said immediately. "You will get yourself killed. There are too many of them." "So what do you suggest? We just wait here for them to come back and finish the job." "I do not know." Delilah slammed her cup down on the table, coffee sloshing over the rim. "I do not know what to do. I feel so helpless, so angry. I just want them to leave me alone. Is that too much to ask? To just be left in peace to live my life?" Ryder moved around the table and crouched beside her chair, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm and solid, anchoring her to something real. "Listen to me," he said intently. "You are not helpless. You have been fighting for this farm alone for 2 years, and you are still here. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Delilah Kensington, and you are not alone anymore. We will figure this out together." Delilah looked into his gray eyes and felt something break open inside her, all the fear and loneliness and desperate hope she had been holding back for so long. Before she could think better of it, before caution or propriety or common sense could stop her, she leaned forward and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Ryder went still with surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he was kissing her back with a fierce tenderness that made her heart soar. It was not a gentle kiss or a tentative one. It was the kiss of two people who had both been alone too long, who had both been holding back too much, and who finally let themselves feel what they had been fighting against. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since the first moment I saw you," he admitted. "Standing there with that shotgun, ready to take on 5 men for your chickens. You were the bravest, most beautiful thing I had ever seen." "I looked like a mess," Delilah protested weakly, but she was smiling through her tears. "You looked like someone worth fighting for," Ryder corrected. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "And if you will let me, I would like to keep fighting for you. Not just against the Dalton gang, but for us, for whatever this is between us." "It is crazy," Delilah whispered. "We barely know each other. It has only been a week." "Sometimes a week is enough," Ryder said. "I know how I feel, Delilah. I know that I want to stay here on this farm with you. I know that I want to help you build something good and strong. And I know that when I think about the future, I see you in it." Delilah felt more tears spill over, but these were different, born of hope rather than despair. "I see you too," she confessed, "in my future. I've been trying not to, trying to be practical, but I cannot help it. You make me feel things I thought I would never feel again." "Then let yourself feel them," Ryder said. "Let yourself want this. We will deal with the Dalton gang and whatever else comes at us, but we will do it together." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring the moment. When they finally pulled apart, Delilah felt steadier, stronger. The fear was still there, and the anger, but now there was something else too, determination, and the fierce joy of knowing she was not facing her battles alone. "So what do we do?" she asked. "About Pritchard and his gang?" Ryder thought for a moment, his expression calculating. "We make it too expensive for them to keep bothering us. Tomorrow I'm going to ride into town and have a conversation with some people. If the law will not help, maybe we can find other folks who are tired of being pushed around. There has to be more than just you who have had enough of the Dalton gang's extortion." "You think people would stand together against them?" "I think people will do a lot when they realize they are not alone," Ryder said. "Fear is powerful, but so is community. We just need to give folks a reason to believe they can win." The next morning, Ryder rode into Oklahoma City, and Delilah spent a tense day waiting and worrying. She threw herself into farm work, cleaning the chicken coop thoroughly, tending to her remaining hens, and weeding the vegetable garden with almost violent intensity. Every sound made her jump, every shadow made her reach for the shotgun she now kept within arm's reach at all times. It was late afternoon when Ryder returned, and he was not alone. 3 other men rode with him, and Delilah recognized them as farmers from neighboring properties. There was old Samuel Thompson, whose dairy farm was 5 miles to the east, young Marcus Webb, who ran a wheat operation to the south, and Henry Crawford, who raised pigs and had a large family to feed. All of them looked grim and determined. "Miss Kensington," Samuel Thompson said, tipping his hat to her, "Ryder here tells us the Dalton gang has been making trouble for you. They have been bleeding us all dry with their protection racket. We are tired of it." "We want to put a stop to it," Marcus Webb added. He was only about 20, still young enough to have more courage than sense. "Ryder says you are willing to stand up to them. We are too." Delilah looked at Ryder, who gave her a small nod. "There are 15 families total who are ready to fight," he said. "The Dalton gang has been terrorizing this whole area, but if we all stand together, we outnumber them. They cannot burn out all of us at once." "But they will try," Delilah said, "and people could get hurt, could get killed." "Some things are worth the risk," Henry Crawford said quietly. He was a middle-aged man with a weathered face and sad eyes. "They already killed my son, shot him when he refused to pay their blood money. I will be damned if I let them get away with that without at least trying to fight back." The pain in his voice made Delilah's throat tight. She had been so focused on her own troubles that she had not thought about all the others who were suffering under the gang's reign of terror. How many people had lost their livelihoods, their homes, their loved ones, while the law looked the other way? "What is the plan?" she asked. They spent the evening strategizing around her kitchen table, drawing maps and making lists. The plan was simple but risky. They would set a trap. Word would spread that Delilah was selling her farm and leaving town, broken by the gang's harassment. She would pack up a wagon as if preparing to leave, making it obvious that she would be vulnerable on the road. The Dalton gang would certainly come to rob her of whatever money they thought she had, but instead of finding a helpless woman alone, they would find 15 armed men waiting in ambush. "It is dangerous," Ryder said, looking directly at Delilah. "You will be the bait. If something goes wrong, you will be right in the line of fire." "So will all of you," Delilah pointed out, "and it is my fight that started this. I am not going to hide while other people risk themselves for me." "That is settled then," Samuel Thompson said. "We will spread the word tomorrow, make sure it gets to the right ears, give them a few days to plan their attack. Then we will be ready." The men left as darkness fell, riding away quietly to avoid drawing attention. Delilah and Ryder stood on the porch, watching them go. "Are you sure about this?" Ryder asked. "It is not too late to back out." "I am sure," Delilah said. "Tired of being afraid, tired of letting them control my life. Whatever happens, at least I will have tried." Ryder pulled her into his arms, and she leaned into his strength, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I will not let anything happen to you, he promised. Do not make promises you cannot keep, Delilah said, but she held him tighter. Just promise me you will be careful, that you will come back to me. That I can promise, Ryder said, and kissed her with a passion that made her forget for a moment about the danger ahead. The next 3 days were an agony of waiting and preparation. Delilah made a show of packing her belongings into a wagon, spreading rumors through town that she was leaving Oklahoma City for good. It hurt to pretend she was abandoning her father's dream, even though she knew it was just a ruse. People in town looked at her with pity, and some with contempt for giving up. She had to bite her tongue to keep from explaining the truth. Ryder and the other men prepared the ambush site, choosing a narrow stretch of road 3 miles from town where the trees grew thick on both sides. They positioned themselves carefully, making sure they would have clear lines of fire, but also cover if things went wrong. Every night, Ryder would return to the farm to stay with Delilah, and they would hold each other in the darkness, neither of them speaking of their fears. On the 4th day, when Delilah drove her wagon out of town in the early morning light, she felt strangely calm. The fear was still there, coiled tight in her belly, but it was joined by a fierce determination. Whatever happened today would end the constant terror, one way or another. She would either break free of the Dalton gang's hold or die trying, and at least that was a choice, a measure of control over her own fate. The road stretched ahead of her, empty and quiet in the morning stillness. The sun was just beginning to climb, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Delilah kept the horse moving at a steady pace, resisting the urge to look around for the men she knew were hidden in the trees. She had to play her part, had to seem like an easy target. She was halfway through the ambush zone when she heard the thunder of hooves behind her. 6 riders came galloping up, spreading out to surround her wagon. Delilah pulled the horse to a stop, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Jack Pritchard rode at the front of the group, a vicious smile on his face. "Going somewhere, Miss Kensington?" he called out. "Heard you were leaving us. That's real sad. We were just starting to have fun." "Let me pass, Pritchard," Delilah said, keeping her voice steady. "I am giving you what you want. I am leaving. The farm is empty. You win." "See, I do not think so," Pritchard said, walking his horse closer. "I think you have got money from selling that farm, and I think that money belongs to us. Payment for all the trouble you caused." "I do not have any money," Delilah said. "I did not sell the farm. I'm just leaving." "Then you will not mind if we search your wagon," Pritchard said. He gestured to his men, and 2 of them dismounted, moving toward the back of the wagon. That was when Ryder stood up from his hiding place in the trees, his rifle trained on Pritchard's chest. "I mind," he said calmly, "and so do my friends." All around them, men emerged from cover, 15 guns aimed at the 6 gang members. The Dalton gang horses shied and danced nervously, sensing the sudden tension. Pritchard's face went from gloating to terrified in the space of a heartbeat. "What is this?" he snarled. "You set a trap?" "You are the ones who rode into it," Ryder replied. "Now here is how this is going to work. You and your boys are going to ride out of here and never come back to this area again. No more protection money, no more threats, no more burning farms. You leave these people alone, or we will hunt you down and end you, all of you." "The Dalton gang is not going to forget this," Pritchard blustered, but his voice shook. "There are more of us. We will come back with an army." "Then we will be ready," Samuel Thompson called out from his position. "And next time, we will not be so merciful. You murdered my boy, Pritchard. Give me a reason, and I will put a bullet through your black heart right now." The gang members looked at each other, clearly realizing they were outmatched and outmaneuvered. Slowly, reluctantly, they began backing their horses away. "This is not over," Pritchard said, but everyone could hear the defeat in his voice. "Yes, it is," Ryder said firmly. "It is over. Now ride before we change our minds about letting you leave." The gang wheeled their horses and fled, galloping away in a cloud of dust. Delilah sat frozen in the wagon seat, hardly daring to believe it had actually worked. They had faced down the Dalton gang and won. She was free. Ryder was at her side in an instant, helping her down from the wagon and pulling her into his arms. She could feel him shaking, the adrenaline of the confrontation working its way through his system, and she held him just as tightly. "It is over," she whispered. "It is really over." "You were so brave," Ryder said into her hair. "God, I was terrified something would go wrong, that they would hurt you before we could stop them." "But they did not," Delilah said. "We did it. We stood up to them and we won." The other men gathered around, everyone talking at once, the relief and triumph palpable in the air. They had taken their power back, had proven that ordinary people could stand against tyranny if they stood together. It was a good feeling, a powerful one. But as Delilah looked around at the tired, relieved faces of her neighbors, she knew the real victory was not just in defeating the gang. It was in the community they had built, the trust they had forged. These people had risked their lives for each other, and that bond would last long after the memory of the Dalton gang faded. The celebration lasted long into the night, everyone gathering at Delilah's farm for food and drink and stories. It felt good to have the house full of people and laughter. "So what now?" Delilah asked. "You said you were looking for work when you rode into town. You found it, helped me save the farm, stopped the gang. I suppose you will be moving on soon." Ryder turned to face her, his expression serious. "Is that what you think? That I would just leave?" "I do not know what to think," Delilah admitted. "Everything has happened so fast. I do not want to assume anything." "Then let me make it clear," Ryder said. He took both her hands in his gray eyes intense in the starlight. "I am not going anywhere, Delilah. Not unless you tell me to go. I meant what I said before. When I think about the future, I see you. I see this farm. I see a life worth building. If you will have me, I would like to stay, not as hired help, but as your partner, in every way." Delilah's heart felt too big for her chest, swelling with so much emotion she could hardly breathe. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "I am asking you to marry me," Ryder said simply. "I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long. But I also know that I love you, Delilah Kensington. I love your courage and your strength and the way you fight for what matters to you. I love your chickens and your farm and the way you look in the morning light. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you. So yes, I am asking. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Delilah's cheeks, but she was smiling so wide it almost hurt. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Ryder. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you rode in here like some hero from a storybook and saved my chickens." Ryder laughed and swept her into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down and kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, the future suddenly seemed bright and full of possibility. They were married 3 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Oklahoma City. The whole community turned out to celebrate, the same people who had stood with them against the Dalton gang. Samuel Thompson walked Delilah down the aisle, since she had no family left to do it, and his eyes were misty as he placed her hand in Ryder's. Delilah wore a dress that had been her mother's, carefully preserved and altered to fit her, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers picked from the fields around her farm. Ryder wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed and his face clean-shaven, and when he looked at her she saw everything she needed to see in his eyes: love, commitment, and a future full of promise. They exchanged vows in front of God and their community, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life might bring. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Ryder kissed her to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered, Delilah felt a sense of rightness settle into her bones. This was where she was meant to be. This was who she was meant to be with. The years that followed were not easy, because farming never was, but they were good. Ryder proved to be everything Delilah could have hoped for in a partner, working tirelessly beside her to build the farm into something prosperous. They expanded the chicken operation, adding new coops and breeding better stock. They planted more crops, bought a few head of cattle, and slowly but surely turned the modest farm into something that could truly support them. True to their word, the Dalton gang never returned. Word eventually reached Oklahoma City that they had been caught robbing a bank in Kansas, and most of them were killed in the ensuing shootout. Jack Pritchard was among the dead, and though Delilah felt a pang of sorrow for any life wasted, she could not mourn him. He had made his choices and paid the price for them. The community that had banded together to fight the gang remained close, supporting each other through droughts and harsh winters and all the other challenges that frontier life threw at them. Delilah and Ryder's home became a gathering place, somewhere people knew they could find a warm welcome and a helping hand if they needed it. 2 years after their wedding, Delilah gave birth to their first child, a son they named William after Ryder's father. He was a healthy, loud baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and Ryder cried when he first held him, overwhelmed with the reality of being a father. Delilah watched her husband cradle their son with infinite gentleness, and she fell in love with him all over again, seeing the tender care he took with this tiny, precious life. William was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Martha after Delilah's mother, and then another son, James, 3 years after that. The house that had once seemed so empty and lonely was now full of noise and chaos and love, children's laughter ringing through the rooms and toys scattered across the floors. Delilah sometimes looked around at her busy, messy, wonderful life and could hardly believe how much had changed from that night when she had stood alone with a shotgun, facing down 5 torches in the darkness. The farm continued to grow and prosper. Delilah's chickens became famous throughout the territory for the quality of their eggs and meat, and she took enormous pride in her flock. She taught all 3 of her children to care for the birds, impressing on them that these animals were not just livestock, but living creatures deserving of respect and kindness. Ryder expanded into horse breeding, developing a reputation for training reliable, even-tempered mounts that were perfect for ranch work. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder surprised Delilah with a gift. He led her out to the barn, where he had been working in secret for months, and showed her what he had built, a new, larger chicken coop with proper nesting boxes, good ventilation, and room for twice as many birds as she currently kept. It was beautifully constructed, every board fitted perfectly, and it even had a sign over the door that read, Kensington Poultry Farm. "I thought it was time your chickens had a proper palace," Ryder said, grinning at her stunned expression. "And I thought it was time we made it official. This is not just your farm anymore, Delilah. It is ours, Kensington and Yancey, together." Delilah threw her arms around him, crying happy tears into his shirt. "It is perfect," she said. "You are perfect. I do not know what I did to deserve you." "You stood your ground," Ryder said simply, holding her close. "You fought for what mattered to you, and you let me stand beside you. That is all I ever wanted, Delilah, to be your partner, to build a life with you." "You have done that and so much more," Delilah said. "You saved me, Ryder, not just from the gang, but from loneliness, from giving up. You showed me that I did not have to do everything alone." "We saved each other," Ryder corrected gently. "You gave me a home when I was drifting. You gave me purpose and family and love. I was lost before I found you, Delilah. You are my anchor." They stood together in the barn, surrounded by the sounds and smells of the farm they had built together, and Delilah felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had not been easy, and there had been hardships and losses along the way, but they had faced everything together, and that had made all the difference. As the children grew older, they each developed their own interests and talents. William showed a natural aptitude for working with animals, spending hours with his father learning about horse training and livestock care. Martha inherited her mother's head for business, keeping meticulous records of the farm's expenses and income, even as a young girl. James was the dreamer of the family, always sketching pictures of the farm and the animals, capturing the beauty of their daily life with an artist's eye. Delilah and Ryder watched their children grow with pride and amazement, marveling at how these little people were becoming their own unique individuals. They were strict when they needed to be, teaching their children the value of hard work and honesty, but they were also generous with affection and encouragement. They wanted their children to know they were loved unconditionally, that home was a safe place where they could always return. Oklahoma City continued to grow around them, transforming from a frontier town into a proper city. The railroad brought more commerce and more people, and soon there were schools and churches and businesses of all kinds. The wild, lawless days of the early 1880s gave way to something more settled and civilized, though the frontier spirit never entirely disappeared. Delilah sometimes thought about how much had changed since that August night in 1883 when Ryder Yancey rode into her life. She had been so alone then, so desperate and afraid, convinced that she would lose everything she had worked for. And now, more than 15 years later, she had a thriving farm, a loving husband, 3 healthy children, and a place in a strong community. She had everything she had ever dreamed of and more. On summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were in bed, Delilah and Ryder would sit on the porch just as they had in those early days, watching the sunset over the land they had tamed together. They would hold hands and talk about their day, about the children, about their plans for the future. And sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence, needing no words to express what they felt. "Do you ever regret it?" Delilah asked one evening when they had been married for 17 years. "Staying here? You could have kept drifting, seen more of the country, had adventures. Instead, you are stuck on a farm in Oklahoma with a wife and 3 children." Ryder turned to look at her, and the love in his eyes was as strong as it had been on their wedding day. "Stuck?" "Delilah, this is not stuck. This is home. This is everything I ever wanted. You are everything I ever wanted. I have never regretted a single moment since the day I met you." "Even when I burned the biscuits?" Delilah teased. "Even then," Ryder said solemnly, though his eyes danced with humor. "Though I will admit those were a rough few days. But the rest of it, our life together, I would not change a thing." "Me neither," Delilah said softly. "You saved me, Ryder. You saved my farm, and my chickens, and my life. And then you gave me so much more than I ever imagined I could have." "We saved each other," Ryder repeated, pulling her close. "And we built something good together, something that will last long after we are gone. Look at this farm, Delilah. Look at our children. This is our legacy. This is what matters." Delilah leaned into his warmth and looked out at the land that had been her father's dream and had become her reality. The chicken coop stood proud and well-maintained, housing nearly 200 birds now. The barn was solid and strong, sheltering their horses and cattle. The house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, and flowers bloomed in the gardens she had planted. Fields of wheat and corn stretched toward the horizon, and in the distance she could see cattle grazing peacefully in the pasture. It was beautiful, and it was theirs, built with sweat and determination and love. And standing at the heart of it all was the man who had ridden into her life when she needed him most, who had chosen to stay, who had become her partner in every sense of the word. The years continued to pass, marked by harvests and birthdays, by seasons of plenty and seasons of struggle. William grew into a fine young man and eventually took over much of the daily running of the farm, showing the same work ethic and dedication his parents had modeled. Martha surprised everyone by deciding to study law, determined to make sure that what had happened with the Dalton gang never happened to anyone else. She became one of the first female lawyers in Oklahoma, fierce in her defense of the vulnerable and the wronged. James pursued his art, documenting the changing landscape of the West with his paintings and sketches, preserving a way of life that was rapidly disappearing. Delilah and Ryder watched their children leave home to pursue their own dreams, felt the bittersweet ache of the empty nest, and then welcomed them back for holidays and celebrations. They became grandparents, marveling at the next generation and spoiling them shamelessly. The farm continued, now in William's capable hands, and Delilah finally had time to slow down a bit, to enjoy the fruits of a lifetime of labor. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Ryder took Delilah on a trip. They rode the train to San Francisco, something they had always talked about doing but never had time for. They saw the ocean for the first time, walked along the beach holding hands like young sweethearts, and stayed in a fancy hotel that made them feel wonderfully out of place. It was a glorious adventure, a celebration of everything they had built and survived together. But as much as they enjoyed the trip, they were both happy to return home to Oklahoma, to the farm that had been the center of their lives for so long. As their train pulled into Oklahoma City Station and they saw William waiting to drive them home, they looked at each other and smiled. This was where they belonged. This was where their story had begun. And this was where it would end. They lived to see the turn of the century, watching the old frontier give way to modernity. Automobiles began to appear on the streets of Oklahoma City. Electricity came to town, though the farm still relied on lamps and generators. The world was changing rapidly, but some things remained constant. The land, the work, the love they shared. Ryder died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, with Delilah beside him holding his hand. It was a cold January night in 1906, and she woke in the pre-dawn darkness to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still warm in hers. She sat with him for a long time, crying quiet tears and remembering everything they had shared, every moment from that first night when he had ridden to her rescue until this final moment when he had left her behind. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Ryder had touched over the years. There were farmers he had helped, neighbors he had befriended, young men he had mentored. Martha spoke eloquently about the father who had taught her that strength and gentleness could coexist, that a real man protected the vulnerable and stood up for what was right. William talked about working beside his father every day, learning not just how to run a farm, but how to be a good husband and father. James read a poem he had written, painting his father's life in beautiful, heartfelt words. And Delilah, standing beside the grave of the man she had loved for more than 3 decades, spoke of the moment that had changed everything. A cowboy riding out of the darkness to save her chickens, and in doing so, saving her heart. "He was the best man I ever knew," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "He was brave and kind and true. He stood beside me through everything, never wavering, never giving up. He made me laugh when I wanted to cry. He held me when I was scared. He celebrated my victories and shared my defeats. He was my partner, my love, my home. And I will miss him every single day for the rest of my life." Delilah lived for another 7 years after Ryder's death, staying active on the farm and spending as much time as possible with her children and grandchildren. She told them stories about the old days, about what the frontier had been like, about the night the Dalton gang came and a stranger became her savior. The grandchildren loved those stories, begging her to tell them again and again, and she was happy to oblige, keeping Ryder's memory alive through the tales of their life together. She died in the spring of 1913, at the age of 72, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch watching the sunset. William found her there, a peaceful smile on her face, and he knew she had finally gone to join the man she had loved so deeply. They buried her beside Ryder, under a cottonwood tree that had shaded their courtship and their marriage, and the whole community mourned the passing of a woman who had been a pioneer in every sense of the word. The farm continued, passed down through the Yancey family for generations. The chicken operation that Delilah had started with just 42 hens grew into one of the most successful in the state. The house was preserved and eventually became a historical site, a testament to the ordinary people who had built extraordinary lives on the Oklahoma frontier. And in the family cemetery, under that old cottonwood tree, 2 headstones stood side by side. Ryder Yancey, 1858-1906, beloved husband, father, and friend. Delilah Kensington Yancey, 1860-1913, beloved wife, mother, and pioneer. And beneath both names, a single shared epitaph, "Together forever." Their story became part of the fabric of Oklahoma history, told and retold with each generation. It was a story of courage in the face of fear, of standing up against tyranny, of 2 lonely people finding each other when they needed it most. It was a story about chickens and cowboys, about farms and families, about love blooming in unexpected places. But most of all, it was a story about hope, the hope that even in the darkest moments, help might come riding out of the darkness. The hope that standing together, ordinary people could overcome extraordinary odds. The hope that love, real and true and deep, could survive any challenge. And that hope lived on, generation after generation, in the land they had tamed, the family they had built, and the love story that would never be forgotten.